We've got breaking news this morning. A major security summit in China is putting President Xi Jinping in the spotlight with more than 20 other world leaders. And it's also giving Vladimir Putin a chance to get closer with India's Prime Minister Modi as the two leaders shared a warm greeting with Xi. And you can also see Modi holding Putin's hand. Hopefully we can show some video of that, of Modi and Putin actually walking together, holding hands. CNN senior international correspondent Ivan Watson explains how the Chinese leader is using this meeting to outline his vision for a reshaped global order, with Beijing leading the way.
Pamela, I think the enduring image of this regional summit will be the leaders of three of the world's largest countries, that's Russia, China, and India, cordially rubbing shoulders, looking very happy together, and complaining that the world has gotten more uncertain and chaotic than ever. This has been a forum for Russia and China, two close partners, to complain about the U.S. dominating international relations too much in their eyes since the end of the Cold War, and calling for the creation of a new, as they would put it, more fair system of governance. Listen to what Russian Vladimir Putin had to say.
A system that would replace the outdated Eurocentric and Euro-Atlantic models, taking into account the interest of the broadest possible range of countries, truly balanced, and therefore preventing attempts by some states to secure their own safety at the expense of others.
Of course, it is the Russian military that has been bombing Ukrainian cities night after night. Vladimir Putin describing that as a crisis, not a war, and blaming the West for starting that terrible conflict. Most notable, I think, at this summit was the presence of the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who skipped last year's summit amid a real downturn in relations with his Chinese neighbor. It was about 5 years ago that Indian and Chinese soldiers were beating each other to death in a disputed border region in the Himalayas. He was here in China for the first time in 7 years, clearly trying to mend fences with the Chinese leader Xi Jinping, and also stinging from the fact that the Trump administration imposed 50% tariffs on India, that seen by many in India as the U.S. Are making a sharp U-turn from growing relations between Washington and New Delhi over the course of nearly 25 years. So a lot of geopolitics at work here, and we're going to see the symbolism shift from diplomacy to Beijing in just 2 days' time, when China is expected to put on a major military parade, and some of the guests of honor are expected to be the Russian president as well as the leaders of Iran and North Korea. Back to you, Pam.
All right, Ivan Watson, thank you so much for bringing us the latest there. And let's continue the conversation. With us now, CNN military analyst and retired Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton. Hi, good to see you. So how is President Xi's message about a new world order being received by the likes of Putin and Modi?
Well, this is going to be very interesting, Pamela, and one of the key things here is that Xi is really trying to present himself as this stabilizing force in the world, as opposed to the chaotic world, as Ivan was mentioning in his report, that they seem to be confronted with under President Trump. So what you're seeing in this particular case is that leaders of, well, Russia is very dependent on China. India has become dependent on Russia for oil, for cheap oil. That's why they got those 50% tariffs. And it's really a confluence of different interests that are bringing these leaders together. They think that they can do better in this grouping, at least for the moment. They think they can do better in this grouping that is led by China. And they think that if they change the world order to something that appears to be more favorable to them, they are going to accrue some advantages that they otherwise wouldn't accrue under a US-dominated world order. Now, in point of fact, that's going to be something that's going to be much harder for the US to deal with. It will potentially result in trade imbalances that are even greater than the ones we have now. And it could also really make it difficult for us to exert influence over areas of the world we've traditionally had some sway in.
Yeah, and Vladimir Putin, for his part, has his own agenda, obviously, for wanting to get away from what he calls a Eurocentric model. How does his attempts to build a stronger relationship with China and India impact the U.S. and Europe?
So what he's trying to do is really pull Russia away from everything that is, happening in Europe in terms of what the EU is doing, and of course his efforts in Ukraine, his war against Ukraine, has already, in essence, set the ground for that kind of a movement. So now what you're seeing is Russia is actually dependent on Chinese help in order to have the economic wherewithal to continue to prosecute the war in Ukraine. So it's in Russia's interest at the moment to maintain really close ties with China. It's almost a neo-colonial relationship between the two countries. Russia is providing raw materials in the form of oil, timber, other raw materials, while China is providing Russia with a lot of manufactured goods. In fact, a lot of the cars that you see on Russia's streets right now are actually Chinese manufactured vehicles. So that's an example of the kind of economic ties that are being developed between these two countries. And in many ways, it's a logical extension of what is, in essence, Putin's policy of drawing himself away from the West and moving closer to the East.
I want to also ask you about this pretty stunning incident. This plane carrying the EU Commission president was apparently targeted by GPS navigation jamming yesterday. This is according to the Commission. So the pilots had to rely on paper maps. Now they're alleging that Russia was behind this. How do you read this?
Yeah, I think that's very likely, Pamela. In fact, Russia has a long history of using GPS jammers to go after both military and civilian aircraft in other countries. We saw that in the run-up to the second Gulf War. We saw Russian GPS jammers actually helping the Iraqis, and that was something that we actually targeted in the run-up to the second Gulf War. So there's a history here, and what the Russians have done more recently is they've used GPS jamming devices to go after commercial aircraft that are flying over the Baltic states and the Baltic Sea. They've also done similar things with aircraft in Polish airspace. So there is an effort by the Russians to, in essence, take those kinds of technical capabilities and weaponize them. If the Europeans are going to try to find a way around this, they're going to have to develop ways to safeguard their systems from this kind of jamming, and they're also going to have to make sure that their pilots, like those for Ursula von der Leyen, understand how to actually go ahead and use pen and paper to circumvent these kinds of technical attacks.
All right. Thank you so much, Cedric Leighton. Always great to see you.